computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hello, and welcome back to the final episode of this season of Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm so excited to talk to you this week about a novel that I have read before, and I just knew that when I was looking for award-winning novels to talk about on the podcast, that it had to be this book. Because as soon as I read it the first time, I started recommending it to everyone. And it was one of those books where I just knew that I vibed with the author, the way they wrote, how she created characters. And it was one of those times where I was like, this is now an instant buy author for me. And I will probably reference her other book that is out now that's more of a fantasy novel, actually, because I think there are some really interesting correlations between this novel and that one. And you may be asking, what novel? What novel, Liz? You have not told me. This week's novel is called Some Desperate Glory by the fabulous Emily Tesh. Emily Tesh is a UK-based author of science fiction and fantasy. Her debut novel, Some Desperate Glory, won the Hugo Award for Best Novel. Tesh is also a winner of the Astounding Award and the author of the World Fantasy Award-winning Green Hollow duology. Now, if I'm correct, the Green Hollow duology, those were novellas, so they weren't considered her debut novels, but they were published, like traditionally published, I believe. In addition to the Hugo Award for Best Novel, Some Desperate Glory was also a finalist for the Arthur C. Clarke Award and a finalist for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction. So it did really well. It's only a couple of years old. It was published in 2023, so it is relatively recent. And if you haven't heard of it, you should absolutely go pick up a copy. It comes in at roughly, the estimate I found online was 145,676 words. And that may throw out a red flag if you're a writer and you're like, hang on, her debut is 145,000 words. See, this is where I think having written some novellas first that got published gave her that advantage. If you are looking to be traditionally published and you're looking to get an agent, there's a lot of discourse about how long your novel can be. And generally speaking, your debut, they top out at like 120,000 words is like the top for science fiction and fantasy. There are a lot of agents who will auto-reject anything over 100,000. So to see a chunky book like this, I think my copy, I have the paperback, is 436 pages. So it's a big book. It reads really quick, though. Just before we begin this podcast, I did want to give a content warning, kind of a blanket, really wide notice. This book contains a lot of sexist, homophobic, transphobic, racist, ableist attitudes. They talk about sexual assaults. There is forced pregnancy discussions, a lot of violence, abuse, radicalization, genocides, suicidal ideation and suicides, and death. So we will be talking about all of those things, not in any sort of graphic way, but just as a warning on this episode. Thanks. If you have not heard of Some Desperate Glory before, it is a space opera, military science fiction, YA novel. Now, I did see some confusion online, which I thought was really interesting, where people were like, wait, is this a YA novel? And I don't know why there was confusion, because the main character is clearly a teenager. Like, it's absolutely from the perspective of a teenager, which, to be fair, doesn't always make something YA. But I think the book, because it's so long, some people are like, oh, it has to be an adult novel. But I really don't think so. I classify this as a young adult novel. It's about coming of age. It's got like young adult themes. The way that the novel writes about a lot of the really heavy topics, I think makes sense through a YA lens. If you were to categorize this as an adult novel, I think that you'd have to write it differently. Not that like adults can't read this, but I really think that there's some nuance there that I could probably talk about a whole podcast episode on that. But just to clarify, Kier, our main character, is 17 in this novel. So to me, that's YA. Now, the snack that I paired with this lovely book, I kind of cheated. I make the rules. There is no cheating here. Normally, I pick a snack and then I'm like, ooh, how did it fit? This one, I knew what I wanted to eat because of a scene in this book. So I made chocolate cake with lovely chocolate frosting on top. And I always get the frostings with the sprinkles in the lid. I think it's like the funfetti ones. And I made it with my kids and it was a lot of fun and it was gone really fast. The book definitely lasted longer than the cake did. But there is a lovely scene in the book where our main character eats like 4 slices of cake and then gets really embarrassed because she realizes she was only supposed to eat 1 because for reasons. And I said that's the perfect choice. So my snack fit really well, I think. The easiest way, I think, to jump in and tell you about this book is I'm going to start with the back jacket copy because I think it does a really good job of giving you kind of an overview of the themes and kind of the flavor of this story. So it starts with, while we live, the enemy shall fear us. All her life, Kier has trained for the day she can avenge the murder of planet Earth. Raised in the bowels of Gaia Station alongside the last scraps of humanity, she readies herself to face the wisdom, the all-powerful, reality-shaping weapon that gave the Majota their victory over humanity. They are what's left. They are what must survive. Kier is one of the best warriors of her generation, the sword of a dead planet. But when command assigns her brother to certain death and relegates her to the nursery to bear sons until she dies trying, she knows she must take humanity's revenge into her own hands. Alongside her brother's brilliant but seditious friend, and a lonely captive alien, she escapes from everything she's ever known into a universe far more complicated than she was taught and far more wondrous than she could have imagined. And then it goes into, the quotes from everybody who was like, this is an amazing book. And I agree. I really do. Now, what I think is not actually captured by the back jacket copy, surprise, the 3 paragraphs on the back of the book don't cover a 400-page book. But I think that from the jump, this book is about brainwashing and living life under a fascist regime and in a cult, but not knowing any of those things and just how that can shape someone. And then how they react when they realize that once they're out in the world, that everything they thought about the world and everything they were ever told about the world was a lie. And I think that that's just a huge through line in this book. And one of the really cool things that happens is about halfway through the book, So the book starts and you hate this girl. This main character is the least likable main character I have ever read, ever. But I was so intrigued because maybe this is because I'm an adult reading a young adult novel, so I can see what's being done on the page, or maybe it's something about being a writer, and so I know how you construct a character. But it was particularly obvious on my reread, all of the things that Tesh was doing to show us that Kier's worldview was maybe not the worldview of even sometimes some of the other people living in this same cult of Gaia Station, where they were being told since birth, you're the last real humans out there. You know, they knew that there were other humans living on planets, but they were all seen as traitors. You know, they had given up the fight of the Earth. And after the Earth had been destroyed by these aliens, the Majota, they are the only ones trying to avenge Earth. So they're the only real humans left. And you can tell there are these little moments where you're like, oh, that's distorted thinking. Like, she clearly has taken the propaganda hook, line, and sinker. But it's still really interesting because you're like, how am I going to survive 400 something pages with this awful person? And then halfway through the book, there is this twist where everybody actually dies. Spoilers, halfway through this book, we have hung out with Kier, and she has gotten that assignment to be nursery and basically be the breeding stock of this outpost, where they assume that, you know, she is the last of the war breed type, where they have genetics that are just beyond normal humans, but they don't have those abilities anymore because all of that machinery is broken down. So they have to rely on the good old-fashioned way of creating more people. And essentially, she's been assigned to this when she believed that she would be a warrior. And that's hard enough. And she can almost swallow it. You see her kind of be like, okay, obviously, like, it's not what I wanted, but there is value to it. You know, she's taking those lines of propaganda, but then she finds out that her brother, who is the only person that she is even like remotely nice to, remotely close to, and she's still kind of a jerk to him. And you find out throughout the book, like, she didn't really know him much at all, but he gets assigned to what's called strike, or so she thinks. And what strike is strike, quote, doesn't exist. But what it is it's basically a suicide mission to go and be almost like a suicide bomber, go on these missions that are unwinnable. But instead, she's told that he deserted. Now, their older sister also deserted, and she doesn't know why, other than she assumes her sister turned traitor. And so she can't believe that her brother would turn traitor as well. So she decides to dig into this. And this is when she finds out, oh, they're covering it up. He's actually Strike. And I'm going to go find him, and I'm going to go save him, and I'm going to go help him on his mission, like, and bring him back so that he doesn't die. To do this, she has to enlist the help of Avi. Avi is another boy on Gaia Station who is friends with Magnus, her brother, and is basically a computer genius. And that's really important throughout the whole thing because he does all sorts of crazy computer hacker stuff and whatnot. So we just kind of find out and know that he's a genius, and he helps her escape along with this alien called Iso. And Iso is a Majota. Now, if you remember, the Majota were the aliens that destroyed the Earth. So we've got this really like crazy trio, and they just don't get along. And you're like, I don't know how I'm going to read a whole book of this terrible girl being mean to everybody, using the wrong pronouns for the alien because she just can't possibly comprehend like outside of the gender binary. And you're like, this is terrible. And then halfway through the book, like I said, everyone dies. And then there's this reset. How does this happen, you may ask? This is where the wisdom comes in. If you remember, the wisdom is, according to the back of the book, an all-powerful, reality-shaping weapon, okay, that gave the Majota their victory over humanity. So the wisdom helped the Majota destroy the Earth. And the wisdom has all sorts of crazy powers. And what ends up happening is halfway through this book, we get a reset and we go to essentially a parallel universe. And the wisdom is like, where do you want to go to fix this? You know, your brother's dead. Avi has literally used the wisdom and all of his hacking skills to kill like half the planets in the universe as revenge for them killing Earth. And she's like, oh my God, this is the worst. This is the worst timeline, right? So the wisdom's like, pick a new timeline. And she's like, okay, take me back to Doomsday. Doomsday is the day that the Earth was killed. And we have seen her run the scenario over and over and over again on Gaia Station to try and fix Doomsday, to make it so that the Earth doesn't get destroyed. And so halfway through this book, we are slotted back into history, into this other universe, and Doomsday doesn't happen. Doomsday happens, but the Earth doesn't die. And so we see this whole other shift of what would everything have been like if the Earth had survived? If Gaia Station had never been a thing. So now the book resets and we go into section, I think this is section 3 in the book, or part 4. Sorry, we're in part 4 now. And it is this world where the Earth didn't die. Now, do we think that solves everyone's problems? No, it did not, because humans suck, basically. That's kind of what it boils down to. Tesh does this really cool thing where each of these sections is started with almost like a fake primary source. And the one that starts this section is from a textbook that obviously doesn't exist, called Federation and Other Problems, An Introduction to Human Political Thought, 3rd edition. And it basically outlines in a brilliant way, like this is so clever and so good for this book, because in 2 pages we get the history of this new world. So we're immediately oriented in this new universe. And we see Kier, who goes by Val. So her full name was like Val Kier. And in this universe, she goes by Val. And she's actually like friends with people. And she's not a terrible person. Now, is she the best person in the world? No. And it gives like major propaganda vibes, actually, honestly, because she and Cleo, who is one of her friends wasn't a friend in the beginning of the book, but is a friend here, and her roommate, the world is kind of this, how do they put it? Magneterra, so this is the space station that they live on, is best described as a militarized technocratic oligarchy with elements of authoritarian populism. Or as one human historian put it, a dreadful international compromise that pleases no one. And so obviously, is it a step up from Gaia Station? Yes. They're not in the same cult anymore, but they're definitely still like cult vibes. So we're seeing all of these characters that we've gotten to know for 200 something pages. Yeah, like almost 250 pages. So sometimes that's a whole book. And we're getting to see her brother. Magnus is now Max, and Avi is there. And we're seeing everybody in this shifted universe. She goes out on a date with this girl who in the original universe was the only one that like, it was almost this like pity. She would take pity on her, but there were all of these hints that it was like, oh, well, she thought like she was pretty. So now in this universe, they're going out on a date. But before anything really gets going in this new universe, because you're kind of like, okay, where's this going? Like, is this a whole new book? Who shows up but Iso, the alien from the first half. Now, what we had found out about the alien that you need to know is that this alien was able to communicate with the wisdom and it was called the Prince of the Wisdom. Really, it was more like a slave to the wisdom. And so Iso shows up, and obviously Kier has no idea who this alien is. But the twist is Iso is there and there are problems. And Iso's like, I am going to give you all of your memories back from this other universe, from this other life, so that you will believe me when I tell you that there are problems that we have to solve. And that basically humans sucked and the wisdom could see this. And in the end, even in this universe, even in this reality, all of those people were going to die. And the wisdom needed to be destroyed. And all of these different worlds are going to be destroyed, even though Earth was saved. So Iso is like, would you try again? Can you go to another universe and try again? And Val agrees. And then we are into part 5. And part 5 is where everything kind of comes together, where we are back on Gaia Station. But this time, Iso gives Kier her memories again. And so now she's got memories of these 2 very different lives that both ended in disaster. And she has to make decisions. But it's weird because she's reliving parts of her life that she assumes she knows what's going to happen. Like, she gets her assignment and she assumes she's going to be in nursery again. And instead, in this third universe that's almost exactly like the first, but it's a little different, the commander, who she calls Uncle Joel, has decided he is going to start a war and wipe out the traitor humans on the planet that, I know I am saying this wrong, I think it's something like Chrysopolis. But in my head, every time the planet is chrysanthemum. So like the flower, I know it's definitely not pronounced that way, but hey, there's a lot of names in this book and sometimes that's what you get. So he's planning a war, and that's what kind of tips this third iteration, third universe, but like the first, but it's not the first. Are you with me? Are you with me? Do you love like time jumps just as much as I do? What happens is she isn't actually assigned nursery. What happens is 3 other girls from her group, from her little age group, are assigned nursery, and she is assigned straight to command, which never happens, except for the time that it happened with her older sister. And so we see that by this point in the book, we know that her older sister did not turn traitor in the fact that it didn't come out of the blue. Essentially, she was assigned to her Uncle Joel, and then Uncle Joel raped her and she got pregnant and she had this child and she left with the child. And the reason she could get away is that he knew it was his child with her on the ship, so they didn't destroy the ship because nobody could leave. It was a cult. So by this point in this universe, with all of her memories from everything, Kier knows this. So she sees that this is not the goal she's always worked for, you know, the dream job she always wanted. She knows that he's a predator and he has marked her, essentially. So this is where she turns to the girls And for the first time, with the knowledge that she has been basically the worst for 17 years with these girls. I think they're together for like 7. They get assigned when they're 10. So these girls she's lived with for 7 years who all freaking hate her. And she had no idea in the first universe because she was just oblivious and had drank the Kool-Aid, literally. Well, not literally, obviously. Figuratively drank the Kool-Aid. She knows that if she is going to succeed in this universe where the war doesn't inevitably continue, where all of these worlds don't get killed, she is going to need to work with others. And here's what I really loved about this book that ties into one of the things that I thought was really interesting about Emily Tesh's second book, The Incandescent, or second novel-length book, was in this book, the teenagers don't save the day on their own. And it was such a refreshing take because how many YA novels do we just assume that all of the adults are either like stupid or evil and there's nobody who's helpful? And the way that the final act of this book plays out, we realize like she could not have done this alone. Like that's kind of the point of the book is she needed, yes, the group of girls with her, but they also needed these adults. And this is what reminded me of spoilers for Hunger Games series. If you have not read the most recent Sunrise on the Reaping, there are spoilers. So in that, we find out in like the Hunger Games, we find out that it's been, by the time we get to Katniss, and Katniss is this figurehead who like saves everybody as the Mockingjay, that so many other people have been working behind the scenes for so long to get us to that point. And that's what we find in this book, too, is that the teenagers can't save everything on their own. Now, yes, are they important? Absolutely. And I do think in real life, like the youth are so important because if there's one thing about young people, it's how passionate they are and also how much energy they can devote to a cause. I'm in my late 30s now, and I have so many responsibilities. I have so many things going on, but like the enthusiasm of a teenager who doesn't have all of the baggage that you have as an adult is, first of all, infectious, and second of all, necessary to do like crazy stuff, right? So I love that Tesh doesn't just have this be some sort of like the teenagers saved the day and all of the adults were stupid. No, like there's even this moment where Kier has this internal thought of like, oh, like the adults are doing stuff and they have been doing stuff. And now there's even some saltiness, I think, at one point where she's like, she's not in charge anymore. She's not the main character as the main character of this book, which I thought was such a refreshing, interesting take. And now Tesh wrote a second book, The Incandescent, which is like, I tell everybody, I'm like, if you want, for the people who grew up on Harry Potter but can't handle Harry Potter anymore, this is the book for you. It's British boarding school, it's magical, and it's from the adult's point of view. And what's so interesting in that book is you get these little tastes of like the teenagers doing their teenage things away at boarding school. And like 90% of the time, they're just causing problems. But they think like you see it from the other side. You're like, oh, they think that they can like solve this thing that none of the adults could solve. And like, are they helpful at points? Of course they are. But they're literally not the main character. And so I just kind of loved that thread, I guess, between Some Desperate Glory and The Incandescent, where it was looking at that chosen one trope, the main character energy of teenagers. So I thought that was really interesting. And so then in the end, we defeat Gaia Station. We defeat, creepy Uncle Joel. We don't like him. He dies. He gets, quote, smeared across 15 dimensions or something. It's really satisfying. And then we think that Kira's going to die and, she self-sacrifices and Issa the alien is there and they're literally in this little like space bubble at one point. And it's like a really sweet moment. And then all of a sudden something crazy happens again. I feel like that's a theme in this book. And there were people who definitely got salty about, they were like, oh, there's all these like Deus Ex Machina moments where it was like, that was awfully convenient. And yeah, okay, maybe a little bit, but it was set up. So something that had happened that wasn't really addressed in kind of the first third of the book comes back at the very end. And maybe it just wasn't, it was clear on a reread for me. I was like, oh, I can see it now how it was there. But maybe it needed just like one more touch point to not feel like super convenient. That essentially she gets like pulled onto the alien's ship. And it's like, surprise, you're not going to die. And actually, like, you can live. And you live happily ever after. As much as you can in this world. They're going to go be refugees. And we find that this tiny piece of the wisdom is left in this ship. And it decided to save her one final time. Like, thanks, you did a lot. And you kind of helped us realign everything. So you were worth saving. So yeah, it's a little hokey. But by that point, I was like, I don't care. She gets to live. I think sometimes I read a lot of Goodreads opinions, reviews about this book, and I actually wish I hadn't because it gives me something to talk about on the podcast. But the experience of reading critical reviews for a book that you really, really loved, and it's not even, I didn't write it. I got in my feelings about it because I was like, no, you're wrong. And so I know that someday I will definitely not be reading my Goodreads reviews on things because I couldn't I wanted to like go to battle for Emily Tesh because I was like, no, this book is brilliant and you just didn't get it. But essentially, like, some people were a little salty about that. And I was like, you know what? I think some people read to find something wrong. Like, they're looking the whole time to find, oh, where can I be right about something? Where can I show how smart I am about this? And not to be entertained, and not just entertained, not to say that I don't read things critically, because obviously, like, this book is full of things that are not necessarily entertaining. Like I said, for the first half of the book, Kira is a terrible character. But I think that maybe I go into books with an open mind for an open experience of the book. And I'm wanting to have a good experience. And I think that's where I had to leave it with the Goodreads reviews. I was like, maybe I'll pull some good lines. And then I just got all upset. So no Goodreads reviews for you, dear listener. Sorry about that. One thing that I did want to talk about I'm going to limit myself, like no more than 5 minutes on this rant, because if you are chronically online like myself, there is a super popular science fiction author who has gone a little viral for some comments he's made about how he hates books with an agenda that show the author is trying to make a statement, and that he doesn't like politics being thrown into books. He doesn't write books with politics. And I just wanted to die a little bit inside and make the note that all art is political. This book is, yes, hit you in the face, political. Not every book is. But to say that a book, especially a science fiction book, like if you're writing science fiction and you don't think that it's political, it just means that you are sitting in such a place of privilege that you don't see your existence as political. And not everyone else has that same privilege. And to say that authors are pushing agendas when they're writing books that just don't center your own view of what's, quote, normal and non-political. It's just infuriating to me, because why create art or take all the time to write a book if you, quote, have nothing to say? It's disingenuous at best, and I don't even know the worst take of it. It's infuriating and wild to me, because if you're writing science fiction, you're writing about politics. If you're writing about climate change, you're writing about politics. If you're writing about space and humans in our place in space, you're writing about politics. Today, as I'm recording, I just finished watching the Artemis 2 launch that's doing the flyby to the moon. Amazing experience. It's so political. But some people would just say, no, we're just going to the moon. Like, that's not political. It's not politics. But all of it is, because it costs money to go to the moon. And how many people have pointed out, like, if we took NASA's budget, how many people could we feed? Now, while I personally disagree with that as the solution to poverty, like gutting our science programs is not it. There are plenty of other things in our budget that are something that I would support gutting to feed people. But to say that space and humanity's place in it is not political is to ignore that life is political. I can't. Okay, I've reached my limit there. And hey, reach out on social media. Hit me up on Blue Sky at Liz J. Bradley, and we will chat some more about how art and science fiction are political. I'd love to chat. It's definitely a huge conversation. Now, some of the things that I loved about this book that I haven't already talked about was just how Emily Tesh, and I did talk about this, but I want to dig into some details, was how she wrote Valkyr as such a wholly unlikable character, but she was so intriguing to me. And I think a lot of it has to do with, we see these cracks, or we have these moments where it's a little red flag for us, the reader, that things are probably not as they seem. Because if you're reading with any sort of critical lens, you get to a line like, let me pull up, just within the first chapter here, okay? We have lines like, the cadet barracks were for sleeping. No one wasted time in the arcade but weaklings and traitors in waiting. I was like, that is such a wild leap, that the people who hang out in the place that's meant for entertainment are weaklings or traitors in waiting. And I was like, wow, this girl has got issues. But a line like that, to, I would think, most well-adjusted people would stick out. And you're like, oh, how do you get to that point where that's what you think? Because clearly not everybody on Gaia Station thinks that way. I think that just, she's not able to feel comfortable anywhere on the station unless she is doing her training and her, single-minded mission to avenge Earth. So she's got to be working out. She's not comfortable at all in any other space. And I think that's such a brilliant way. People talk about show, don't tell all the time in writing. That's what this first chapter is. You don't have to sit down and say, hey, Valkyr is brainwashed. The whole first chapter shows you how she's brainwashed, how she sees the world in this distorted way. And then there is later in the book, when she has left Gaia Station and she's injured and she's hanging out in this house while she's healing up. And I had to underline these lines because I was like, here's another perfectly, like, this is the brainwashing. other people had been talking to her about these things that were kind of chipping away at her thoughts about Gaia Station, but also because Gaia Station had become her identity. I think it actually says at one point in this book, she was Gaia Station. And I was like, whoa, talk about like propaganda and conflating yourself with something really freaking toxic. She is upset and she's really not cool with it. And the line literally is, it was all this thinking. Kier had nothing to do but think for 12 days. And then another paragraph down, and she thought. She kept thinking thoughts she didn't like. And then she goes on and it's because Avi's a dissident and Iso's this terrible alien and they were getting under her skin and they were the ones who were wrong, right? Like they're the ones trying to brainwash me. But I'm stronger. I'm better than that. And so it's just wild, these ways that Emily Tesh is showing us this brainwashing for this girl. And even when she gets down onto this planet and she finds her long-lost sister who had, quote, gone traitor, and it's so clear to you as the reader what has happened because, wow, there's a child there. And that child, Kier can see that the child looks like Uncle Joel. And she knows her sister was where she was, but her sister wasn't nursery. So she doesn't put two and two together she thinks her sister kidnapped her Uncle Joel's child and like ran away to like punish him. When it's so obvious to the reader, you're like, he raped her and this is her child. And of course it looks like him because that's what happened. And then she escaped. She got out. But Kier can't see that yet. She's still so deep in this and she kind of lies a little bit and then everything falls apart. So I think that Emily Tesh did such a brilliant job of showing us the inner thoughts of this character who is so wholly brainwashed so that you had to keep reading because you're like, where does this go? How does this end? And I think that it's so important of a conversation to be having now. There are so many people who have been brainwashed to make this a US-centric comment and lens, like Emily Tesh is British, but it's silly to say that she's not aware of what's going on in the world and in the US, and because it's not happening just here. You know, there is this rise in fascism across the globe where people are so deep, they're in these other realities, and you can talk to them and the proof can be right there in front of their faces, and they just somehow still come to the wrong conclusion because otherwise it completely rocks their sense of self and they can't make that jump. And it takes Kier, what, 3 universes? 3 universes of memories to finally be able to unravel her place and her view of Gaia Station. And even then, even in this last view, like she is confronting these issues. And I think it's so important that nowadays we can see and we can read that and we can, if you're not personally relating, but like how many people are in this administration's second term being like, I was MAGA, but now I see the light, and they're like expecting to be welcomed with open arms. And it's okay. Like, obviously you can't just be like, oh yeah, totally, like forget about it, no big deal. But like people have gone through these experiences where they were living in a different world, essentially. Like they could look at all the same facts and just so easily discard the ones that attack their identity, that now that things are getting to a point where it's obvious and you can't deny it any longer, they either are having this crisis of self or they're finally waking up or whatever. And so I think being able to read a book and see that from the inside of that kind of character's brain is just, it's fascinating and it's important for people. Because here's the thing, like, what does the book prove? What did I say earlier? Humans suck. Like, we make bad decisions, even in good circumstances. We are infighters. We couldn't get our ish together. And so sometimes you have to find a way forward, even if it isn't the perfect way. So I really love this book for going at that conversation and taking a stab at it in a way that isn't from the perspective of a likable character. I think I read somewhere, I think it was in the book club notes, that in an early draft, she had her brother as the main character, which would make a lot of sense in a traditional kind of fascist cult. You know, you want the person who's on their way out, right? Because they're definitely going to be more likable. He's got a little bit, he doesn't have like a full romance arc. Nobody has like a full romance. That was another thing people on Goodreads got mad about. But I didn't care. Like, I love a good romance, but I don't think every book needs it. And also, I don't think that it invalidates calling it a queer novel when you have queer characters, regardless of if they are fully explored within the novel. So that's a whole nother story. I just think that one of the things I'm really going to take away from this book, and I'm going to keep going through because there's so many good parts where she does this reinforcement of the point of view of an unlikable character and made the hard choice. So I think that this is something I can study. Voice is so hard, like voice and character point of view. I've written, I think I'm on my fourth book that I've written all the way through. And one of the notes I would get a lot from beta readers in the earlier books was just that everybody sounded the same. Like all the characters, they might have had they were different ages, they had different jobs, they had different things, but they all kind of sounded the same. And I struggled with that so much because I was like, they all kind of sound like me. So I didn't know how to make a character sound any different than me because I was like, well, it's me writing it. And I think that this is just such a good, it's seeing the arcade. How does each character see the arcade? For some people, it's a refuge. For Kier, it's a place for weaklings and traitors. Like that right there gives you such a crystal clear difference in a character's voice, in how they talk about something as inconsequential as a room or a place. I also really loved how this book was structured. It was broken into these 5 parts. And if you've ever studied Shakespeare or anything like that, the 5-act structure is totally a thing. And it's not as popular as the 3-act structure. But I think that this really works. It reminds me a lot of A Winter's Tale by Shakespeare in terms of the structure, because you have the first act or two where you're in this kind of stark reality. And then you have your act 3 where things kind of open up. And now you're in this, like in A Winter's Tale, I think act 3 is where you go into Bohemia. And it's like, we have a satyr dance and we have this lovely pastoral bit. So in the middle of this book, you know, she goes on to this planet and this lovely pastoral bit. And then in act 4, we've got this total change to this is what life could have been like. And then act 5 is just like jam-packed with action and is tying everything up. And that's kind of how Winter's Tale was structured as well. And I haven't ever thought of structuring a novel that way. I've read tons of 5-act plays. I come from a theater background. And I've never really kind of wrapped my head around it until this book, where it was very obviously, you know, each section has its own cover page that is in a different color, and then you get those primary source inserts. And each section feels like a complete story kind of on its own, but then you put them all together and they just create something more. And it was really well done. It was really interesting to me. So we are running super long again, which, sorry, can't help it. The book is 420 something pages. It's going to take a while to talk about, but I would love to hear your thoughts and what you thought. Have you read Some Desperate Glory? Have I given you so many spoilers that you don't want to read it now? Oh, let me tell you, I didn't spoil everything. I spoiled a lot, but not everything. So I think you should totally go pick up a copy. And you should make yourself some chocolate cake to eat. Just make sure you make yourself a lot of chocolate cake. I can get through this book in a weekend because I read really fast, but it might take you a little longer. I don't know. I'm not going to judge your reading speed of everybody who listens to this podcast. If you're out here listening to like hour-long science fiction deep dive podcasts, I bet you do read fast. So next week's story, there isn't one. I'm so sorry. This is the end of season 3. That's wild. When I started this podcast, I had no idea if I was going to last beyond my first season. I was definitely committed to like make a whole season, but I have been enjoying this so much and I'm so excited about the future of the podcast. However, I will be taking a break for a little bit. I want to get some reading done on my TBR, which is looming and looking at me like with sad puppy eyes because I keep ignoring it for podcast reading. What I can tell you is that when I come back, it will be later this year. So if you're listening on the release date, we're talking 2026. There will be another season this year. And we are going to be talking about, drumroll, speculative poetry. If you have read my bio or checked out my website, you will know that in addition to writing science fiction, short stories, I am also someone who dabbles in poetry. I call myself, I hesitate to, but I have taken the challenge. I've written poems. I have published poems that people have paid me real money for. I am a poet. I am a speculative poet as well. So what we're going to do is deep dive into 12 different speculative poets. Each episode, I will talk about maybe I'm thinking probably a couple, 2 or 3 of their poems. I want to talk about how their poems work together, what I see them talking about, and just kind of what speculative poetry is. I love to read it. It's going to be a great season because you're going to be able to take maybe 10 minutes, read some poems, and then come chat with me about them. Not everybody has the time to read a 400-something page novel. Everybody has a time to read a poem. So I'm super excited about that, and I cannot wait. Now, go ahead and hit the subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you listen to this podcast, and that way you will not miss the new season when it drops. I promise I will shout about it from every social media platform that I am on at the time. But if you want to make sure that you never miss an episode, hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button, whatever they're calling it these days on whatever platform you listen, so that you get notified when the speculative poetry season drops later this year. Thank you so much for going on this wild ride with me. Go out and support science and support authors and just have a wonderful day. Thanks so much. Bye.